Hi, this is Kyle Schwarber, and welcome to the Phillies Show.
Hey, everybody. Ruben Amaro Jr., Jim Salisbury, Todd Zolecki, brought to you by the Foul Territory Network. Hope everybody's doing well. It's Friday, January 10th, 2025. Guys, I hope you're doing well. It is, it's a time of year where it's freezing cold outside. And I don't know about you guys, but once I get past the holidays, the weather's miserable. It's cloudy. It's cold. It's sleeting. It's snowing. And I start thinking about Florida. I really start thinking about the baseball season starting. And I often think about that walk we often make from Baycare Ballpark in Clearwater over to the Carpenter Complex. You know, the little short walk, and then you see some big leaguers over there, but you see a lot of minor leaguers over there getting an early start on the season. And we were thinking about minor leaguers. And when I think about minor leaguers and prospects, I think about none other than MLB Pipeline's Jonathan Mayo. Jonathan, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today. How are you, sir?
Much better after that introduction, man. I have to have you follow me around.
Well, Jonathan, for the Phillies fans that don't know, Jonathan is been with MLB.com, MLB Pipeline forever. How long, Jonathan?
25 plus years, my friend.
There we go. Wow. So that is a long time.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, we don't want to age. Jonathan is one of the guys on the MLB Pipeline crew that puts together the top 100 prospects list. He puts together the Phillies top 30 prospects list. He is the guy on MLB Network the first night of the draft, talking about his board and, guys that get taken, guys that don't get taken, what's going on with the draft. He's the guy in day 2 with Jim Callis, who the Phillies will take Gabriel Rincones Jr. in the 4th round, and he'll immediately go, here's what I got on this guy. He knows it all. So we're excited to have you on, John. That's my little pump you up.
I appreciate
introduction.
That.
Yes.
It's been nice talking to you. See ya.
Yeah. Out of here.
No, it's, we are in list making mode. We're working on our top 100, and I'll get cracking on the top 30, but obviously lining up the Phillies guys who belong on our top 10 position list, which start coming out next week. So
that's right.
We're in it.
That's always cool, because that gets a lot of people talking about, prospects and Phillies prospects, the top 10 at each position. So I know you, how do you do all this work? Let's start with that. How many people are you talking to put together the top 100 list, the top 30 Phillies list, the top 10 list of players at every position?
So the top 100 we're working on right now kind of helps us determine how the top 10 by position lists go. So we do it according to that list. Not every position's got 10 guys in the top 100, so we have to add from there. But we're putting together the top 100 now, and myself and Jim Callis and our third musketeer, Sam Dykstra, kind of put together our own. We usually do like 120 names, 125 names to make sure we're being thorough. We'll combine them and average them out. We'll tweak them a little bit, and then we send it out to sources we have with all 30 organizations, pro scouting directors, people who have a kind of 30,000 foot view of all minor league prospects for feedback. And if there's a lot of feedback that we should move a guy up or move a guy down, or we need to add this guy or take this guy off, we'll listen to that to try to give the closest sort of thorough snapshot there can be for the top 100. Now for a top 30, it's, we split all the teams up. We each have 10, and I'll talk to the farm director, maybe one other person internally, and then run it by the other 2 guys, but also get some feedback from opposing scouting directors to see what they think, about the Phillies top 30. Cause you don't want it just to be an internal list,
right?
Just because there's always going to be a familiarity bias if you're only talking to guys within your system, even if there are, the sources within that system are pretty objective, because they spend so much time just with those guys, they may not necessarily have the context of, well, how does Aidan Miller compare to other infielders in other systems? And so we try to get that perspective as well.
And to be clear, you said you guys have 10 teams apiece, you and Sam and Jim.
Yeah.
You are the Phillies guy at MLB Pipeline.
Otherwise, why would I be on this podcast, Jim?
Well, I just wanted to make that very clear.
Yes, I do the Phillies.
Expertise.
I do the Phillies top 30. It's funny. We used to sort of trade every once in a while, but we haven't done that in quite some time. And the Phillies are not one that I would want to give up anytime soon. So I probably will be the Phillies guy for the foreseeable future.
Well, follow-up question. Why don't you want to give it the Phillies? Why do you have an affinity for the Phillies list?
I pick, it's sort of like when people ask me who my favorite players are, and it's always guys who talk well. Like, you guys know that. Like, a guy could be the best player in the world, but if he can't string a sentence together, it doesn't do us a whole lot of good. So I like guys who can talk. Conversely, I tend to like the systems where there are the people to talk to within the system. And one of the things that I always liked about Preston Mattingly, because he has a scouting background, he always was able to kind of have a little bit more of an objective approach and an understanding of what we are trying to accomplish. And I will say that it was a sad day when he got bumped up. Even though he still likes to talk prospects, but early going talking to Luke Merton has been really good for me also. And they just really understand the system and sort of what we do. This process of doing our top 30 is not typical. It's not talking to a scrum of reporters and that sort of thing. So it's just a little bit of a different animal, and they seem to get it.
I was always it's great to have you on, Jonathan. I was always curious as a GM, how you were culling some of this information and who you were speaking with as far as the organization was concerned. And I didn't really necessarily have a problem with that as a GM, with others speaking to people in our organization. My question to you was, how do you try to, work through, some organizations like to pump up their prospects to the point where it's a little on the ridiculous side. And so I was kind of curious, how do you sort of sift through that? Because you're trying to get as much information as you can. I would assume that you're also talking to some pro scouts out there.
Yeah.
And not just, folks who are assistant GMs or player development guys. I would assume that you're also having those discussions with multiple pro scouts that you have an attachment.
Yeah, that's where the external feedback comes from, Ruben. Like, so when I have the Phillies list in a decent order, after talking to people within the Phillies, I will send it out to a few pro scouting directors from other teams, because it's their job to know what every other system has, right? They have reports on all of them. I could go to individual pro scouts, but they may only have the Southern League, or they may only have, if you're lucky, some teams will do it where they have one team in spring training and you can sort of lean on that guy, and they try to find those people. But the pro scouting directors, again, have that sort of overview of all the other 29 systems. So I will send the Phillies list to 3 or 4 of them, and hopefully I get, two feedbacks back, say, and that helps me offset the tendency to, either whether it's overhyping or just sometimes farm directors are kind of like parents, and they're very protective of their own system. So even if it's not like a mindful or willful pumping their own prospects up too much, which definitely happens, sometimes it's just because that's all you're only with those guys and you're protective of them. And so you try to offset that familiarity bias a little bit by getting that external feedback.
That's interesting. Go, Jim.
I think this stuff is great for the game. A lot of different outlets have their top list, but it gets people buzzing. It gets people talking about the game. People love prospects. I don't know. I do know what it is. It's just the excitement for the future, the new blood. Todd and I know this. When we write a story about a prospect, on our respective websites, the traffic is through the roof. People love to read that stuff. And it's really funny how it has evolved into almost an industry within an industry covering prospects, because there was a time, John, when I first started covering baseball, that MLB did not even announce and would not release its draft lists.
Right.
You had to go sniffing around to people to find out who the team took. And now, gosh, we know all the prospects well before the draft. It's amazing what it's become.
It's crazy. No, I remember those days. You'd maybe get a list of the players they took, but not what round they were taken in. and no one knew anything about them. Amateur baseball has never been, the same as, say, college football or college basketball. So there's not the knowledge of the players going. That's changed a bit. But I remember my first year working for Major League Baseball's website was in 1999, and it was the draft was a conference call.
Yeah.
And that was it. And then eventually we did live video on the website, and that led to the doing the draft on TV at MLB Network. So I think it does start back then, where fans are so much more knowledgeable because there's so much more information. For years and years, Baseball America was kind of the only thing that did anything along those lines. And, I always like to try to give them credit because, Alan Simpson was really the one who sort of was the pioneer in terms of draft coverage. And now it's grown exponentially where you can find out everything about every player from the moment they're playing, at a high level in high school and college, even if you want to dig that deep, but certainly once they get drafted and enter a pro system.
Yeah, you mentioned Baseball America, Jonathan, and the thing that as a player when I was playing, I mean, you'd pick up the Baseball America, and it was like 2 weeks ago were these stats like, hey man, I'm hitting like 350 now, and I'm not hitting 210.
Ruben, you never hit 350. Come on.
Yes, I did.
I'm just kidding.
In the small leagues, I did. But I will say that just to give you a little bit more love, the thing that you guys have done is really help promote the game, and that's the coolest thing about what you and Jim and Sam have done so well is you're promoting baseball and you're making baseball important. And it's and I think it's a really helpful and really cool thing that you guys do.
Well, I appreciate that. And, we enjoy what we're doing. And, for me, the lists and the rankings aside, as Jim and Todd are, like, we love to tell stories. And one of the things that I love about what I do is often I'm the first person providing the story to fans. So when I get to dig in and like really get to know some of these prospects beyond what their hit tool or how hard they throw is, like, I love doing that. And that goes beyond the list, but the rankings also, as much as there's so much more information, like I relish the fact that I am often, or we, at MLB Pipeline are the first to introduce names to people.
Jonathan, what's the story right now that you would tell about the Phillies farm system from maybe where it was 5 years ago to where it is today?
Well, the problem with that question, Todd, is I can't remember last Tuesday. Forget 5 years ago. I mean, honestly, I don't. Jim and I are constantly teasing each other as we get older. Like my institutional memory is just awful. So I will focus on the now,
okay.
And I think the now is that I like the Phillies system. It's interesting. One of the things, it's always a test for any of the top 30s that we do, is that when you're writing up the guys who are like 21 to 30, and you're like, that guy's kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. That's a good sign of depth in the system. It's not a be all end all, certainly not scientific, but none of this is. I think at the very top, there's some good sort of top heaviness with some elite level guys. I know we're going to talk about some of them now, but especially with Andrew Painter, healthy again. And then there's, some younger guys who are starting to make steps forward. And that's one thing you don't really know, but for the last year or so, there's been a steady stream of really young, either high school guys taking the draft or the work that the Phillies have done internationally, where you don't know, until they make full season ball or start moving up the ladder, what they're going to be. And you don't really know, obviously, until they get to Philadelphia. But there's been a steady stream of guys that I'm like, wow, this guy's got some interesting traits that let's see what happens when they get to the United States or to Clearwater or to Reading, or whatever it is, each benchmark. And not all of them end up becoming what they could, that's throughout baseball. But I think what the Phillies have been doing is that recently more of those guys are taking those steps forward.
You saw Andrew Painter pitch a few times, I think, in the Arizona Fall League. You were one of the few reporters that were in the Arizona Fall League. Got to talk to him a few times. That's the guy we get asked about constantly. When's he coming up? What do you think? How can he fit in the rotation? What were your impressions of what you saw from him in the Arizona Fall League?
Outside of one start where his fastball command was iffy, he was the best pitching prospect I've seen in a long time. He was as good as he was before he was hurt, maybe even better, because all that time off and all the working out and arm care and adding a pitch, like the guy, he shouldn't be allowed to add a pitch. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. Like, oh, by the way, here's a better slider. Okay. And it was really, really good. And the thing that was amazing is that when his fastball command wasn't great, he had 3 other pitches to go to. And, the first time I saw him, he didn't throw it. I think he threw 1 changeup and it wasn't very good. But as he told me, he didn't face any left-handers, right? And that's where he's largely going to use that. And then the next time I saw him, he faced a lot of left-handers and he threw like 8+ changeups. He's ready. Like I would understand if the Phillies want to pump the brakes a little bit just because of workload reasons, because he hasn't thrown. But my goodness, there are only a small handful of pitching prospects that I would put in the same category. Jackson Jobe, of the Tigers is right there. And then of course, whenever Roki Sasaki joins us, he's right there. But Andrew Painter is very much right there. The only thing that's missing is a little bit of track record, because we haven't seen him do it in a regular season over the course of a whole year. Right. By the time he does that, he'll graduate it off the prospect list, I would imagine.
Right.
Wow. Can't wait to. I mean, the town is really buzzing about him. I remember how they buzzed about the town buzzed about Cole Hamels, and it's that feel. If I could ask you about another number 1 pitcher they took a few years ago, Mick Abel. Where do you what's going on with him? He has not progressed as the organization would have hoped, but he's still a young man. What are your reports on him?
I haven't talked to anybody for the new stuff for this year yet. I think the thing that has been the most surprising with Mick Abel is that has been the command, and that's the thing that's held him back. The stuff still sounds pretty good. The reports I was getting last year, he's still throwing hard. He's still got a good breaking ball. He's got feel for the changeup. He just can't throw strikes. And I don't know what happened, if he's just tried to throw too hard. But when I saw him in high school, and I thought, he and Painter, to me, were very similar amateur prospects. And I thought that Mick Abel was going to come in and have that really exciting combination of premium stuff with an ability to find the strike zone. And that just never happened. And kind of right out of the gate, he was struggling. I'm like, all right, well, his first year, he's trying to do too much. And he just hasn't gotten there. And I don't know at what point you decide, do we shorten him up and put him in a bullpen and see what happens? You don't want to give up on, a guy with 3 above average plus pitches, and the changeup is an average pitch. You don't want to give up on that. And as you pointed out, he'll be 23 for almost all of this season. So I'd send him out as a starter one more time, but I think the clock is ticking on this. And I mean, it's the one sort of thing that we don't know about. And I don't think this would impact somebody for this long, is he's from that COVID draft and he didn't throw in 2020 in high school. I don't know if that impacted him at all. I have no idea of knowing that. And, we'd have to sort of take a deeper dive into that class and see how that's impacted. But he was a first rounder the summer before, and that he was drafted because of his summer showcase circuit, where he had the premium stuff, he had ceiling and projection, and he threw strikes. So this has been a kind of a surprising disappointment for me.
Interesting.
I'm obviously curious about it. I mean, everybody's talked about the Aidan Millers of the world, and some others, and Kaba has now been moved. I'm just kind of curious about some of the under radar. I'm going to ask some more pitching questions. The kid Gene Cabrera. I don't know if you know him all that well, but I'm sort of curious as to whether what you think of him. He's not a real physical guy, but it sounds like he's got really good arm.
Yeah, he does. He's number 12 on our top 30. Thanks for reading. And I think the big thing for him is that you want him to add strength. Now, we've all seen, the outliers of guys who, and stay sort of thin and slight and can continue to do it on a regular basis. But for him to be a starter long term, he's got to add some strength. But the stuff is there. He's got a mid-90s sinker. He's got a four-seamer that's up to 97, 98. He's got a changeup that probably will be plus eventually. And then he's got a big sweeper that can really freeze hitters at times. And he's done a pretty good job of throwing strikes. So it's a good combination of those things. He made the move up to Double-A. It wasn't as pretty, but pitching in Reading is hard, and it was his first taste of that. So let's see what he does when he gets back there. But there's a lot of ceiling there. Now, I think we've all seen those pitching prospects who, like, every year is like, oh, they need, or even hitters, they need to add strength. They need to add strength, and they never do, or they can't. And then eventually that's when maybe you see either he breaks down or they decide to move him to the bullpen. But he kind of jumped really hard on the radar this year and made a name for himself because he was so good in Jersey City to earn that promotion up to Double-A.
So if we're on pitching, John, let me just interject. Moisés Chace, they picked him up in that trade with Baltimore. If I'm recalling, I think the MLB Pipeline has him in the 20s.
Yeah.
And I talked to other people who like him a lot more than that. What is your read on Moisés Chace?
Well, keep in mind that when I kind of threw him in, and then we do a quick re-ranking in mid, we call it mid-season, but it's really August, post trade deadline. It's not as thorough of a process. So when I dig into the top 30 this year, you might see him, moving up. And Jim, feel free to take credit for that. If you like, you can say, I told them that people liked him better. So, but he's, again, not the biggest guy in the world, but unlike Cabrera, he's really strong and he's super athletic. So that gives him a better chance to start in my book if he can throw more strikes. The stuff is plenty good. The fastball, it's not a plus fastball, but it's got right up in the zone. It's got a low approach angle, so it's tougher to hit than it should be based on the low 90s velocity. He's got a good sweeper. The changeup is coming. He just needs to start throwing it more. So there's some very interesting pieces there. And again, we end up saying this a lot with guys like this just because of his build and the command. But, if you shorten a guy like him up and he's only throwing an inning or two, then you're going to see more velocity, and he could become a really exciting high leverage reliever late in games. And if that's your worst case scenario, then that's a pretty good get.
Yeah, you take that.
Absolutely.
Was that Gregory Soto, Todd?
Yeah, it was Gregory Soto.
Yep.
They got Seth Johnson. Seth Johnson.
Seth Johnson, right? And
Yeah.
Gregory Soto. Yeah.
Yeah. Seth Johnson came back in that deal. So that they got a couple decent pitching prospects. Seth made his debut in September, struggled in that one start, but I know that they're hoping that those guys can provide some depth moving forward for sure. Yeah. And then, Ruben, you mentioned Aidan Miller. This guy's top 100. We've heard people say best Phillies position player prospect since Chase Utley. What do you think about that, Jonathan?
Wow. Well, so I wasn't doing prospecting stuff, or I don't remember what
that
people were saying about Chase Utley as a prospect. So I'm not sure. That, it's hard when you're talking about a guy who had the career he had. It's hard not to think of that when you're doing so. But people cannot rave enough about Aidan Miller. And the fact of the matter is that if Aidan Miller doesn't break his hamate his senior year of high school, there is no way he's a Philadelphia Philly.
Wow.
He should have gone higher. Given what he did on the summer showcase circuit, actually a little surprised that no one took him sooner. But kudos for the Phillies for not hesitating when he dropped in their lap, because he's one of the better power hitting high school prospects I've seen in quite some time, because he could get to the power. There are guys you see who have ridiculous raw power and they put on shows in batting practice. Ruben, you've probably seen when you've gone to see players and you see a guy and you're like, oh my goodness, this is what they look like. And then in a game, they have no idea what they're doing. But Aidan Miller's got an approach. He sees pitches. He's got good plate discipline. He's going to hit as well as hit for power. So I think that's what makes him exciting. I think the one thing that's been a little surprising is that he's still been playing shortstop.
Mm-hmm.
I still think he ends up at third base when all's said and done, but he might be a Gold Glove third baseman. I mean, he's athletic, and I think that's why you leave him at short to help work on the athleticism for as long as possible. And I think that if we were still in the game with the massive defensive shifting, maybe he even stays there for longer, and you see him in the big leagues. Now, we've all seen guys make it to the big leagues as shortstop. I'm like, I never thought that was going to happen. I think people were waiting for Corey Seager to get shifted off to short forever, and look at him. So I don't want to say you never say never, but he played a lot of third base on the summer showcase circuit in high school, and he looked very, very good there. And obviously the offense profiles perfectly at the hot corner.
So do you see him as a Bregman type of a comp as far as the ability to hit and the combination of that and the power? Or do you see him as an even more powerful type of because Bregman sort of worked into his power, obviously playing in Houston and with the short porch and such.
I think I understand that comp, and I think that Aidan is more power over hit now than Bregman was as a prospect. When Alex was coming up, you're like, oh yeah, there's pop. You saw the quick hands, the bat speed. You knew there was going to be some power there, but he's turned more into that over time. Where I think coming up, I thought Bregman was going to be kind of a 280, 300 hitter, maybe 20 homer kind of guy, if it works out. And I probably thought he'd end up at second base. Not that, but, and so I think that Miller's power potential now is much higher than what we thought Bregman's was at the time.
Interesting.
That's really interesting to hear you say. If he didn't break his hamate, he's not there for the Phillies.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, I think he's a top 10 to 15 pick.
It
high school bat.
It reminds me of, gosh, it's been almost it's a generation ago now, but there's no way the Phillies get Cole Hamels if he doesn't break his arm as like a junior or a sophomore in high school, and he's kind of slow coming back. But hey, if that's what you get, in terms of impact, it's going to be a great thing. And hats off for the Phillies for having the courage to take a chance on Cole Hamels, their scouting staff and their medical people, and ditto on Aidan Miller, because it seems like people are almost as excited about Aidan Miller as they are Andrew Painter.
Yeah,
sure. Especially I think because no one's seen Painter for so long. People are going to get excited about him, but also, as you pointed out, like that there hasn't been like a high profile Phillies hitting prospect to make it. And I think the idea that Miller could be that guy, that's exciting because he's a guy, you're talking a guy who's going to play 150 games, and has a chance to be an impact middle of the order kind of bat. As good as Andrew Painter might be, he's still only going to pitch every 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like Miller can almost go anywhere on the diamond, because I was speaking with someone from USA Baseball, and they said, they played him in corner outfield as a young player, and he was dynamite.
Yeah, I believe it. 'Cause like I said, it's, sometimes you have a guy who plays shortstop in high school or even college, and you're like, there's no way he can play short because he's stiff. He's not athletic. Aidan Miller's pretty athletic. I mean, and that's why he's played short for as long as he has. But he's also, like, Jim, not only does that show like his athleticism, it also shows a willingness. He's got a really good head on his shoulders, and he's not the kind of guy who's like, no, I'm a shortstop, or, no, I have to stay on the dirt. I think if say he's in, double A or triple A and there's a need in left field, he's going to take reps in left field when they ask him to, because he understands that's going to get him to the big leagues, and there's not going to be any complaining. He's going to become the best left fielder he can be. I don't think he comes with that kind of ego that can be a stumbling block for a lot of young players with that kind of talent.
Wow, that's a great scouting report.
It's good stuff. That sounds very much like Chase Utley when we sort of bounced him around at third base. The same sort of thing. Chase said, put me where where you need to put me so I can be in the big leagues and contribute.
Lineup is where I want to be, right?
Yeah,
and it doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you asked Aidan Miller to catch, he probably would consider it. That would be a bad idea, by the way.
Listen, it's funny you should say that, because there aren't that many guys who I shouldn't say there aren't that many guys, but that's not like the driving force of a lot of guys. And hey, this is my position. I don't want to go out of my comfort zone. And so you love that about a player.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned catching, Jonathan. This year, this is JT Realmuto's last year of his contract. He'll be a free agent after the season. A couple of years ago, they traded Logan O'Hoppe to the Angels for Brandon Marsh. And so they might need to replace JT after the season. What do you think of some of the Phillies catching prospects? Starting with Eduardo Tait. Caleb Ricketts is in your top 30. What jumps out? I know the Phillies are super high on Tait. Dave Dombrowski has mentioned several times, even a couple of years ago. We were getting calls on this guy. I know you don't know about him, but we've been getting calls on this kid Tait, this catcher down in in the lower levels, and now I think he's fourth on your list.
Yeah. And I would say he could move up, but I'm looking at the top 3 and he will not. But don't be surprised. We haven't figured it out. If he's not on our top 100, he probably will be soon. That said, he's not going to be ready in a year. So they're going to have to find a stopgap. But he's kind of who I was thinking of, when we were talking earlier about these younger guys who you want to see what they do once they get here. And, he hit really well in the Dominican Summer League, but everybody hits well. Todd, I think, would hit 270 in the Dominican Summer League.
Maybe.
Maybe. He's got skills.
I felt I needed to spread it around. I was making fun of Ruben too much. But, so then he comes to the States and he absolutely rakes in the Complex League and gets himself promoted to Clearwater, where he holds his own as a 17-year-old. He turned 18 at the very end of the summer. He's exciting. Now, it may take some time, but he's got the chance to be able to do everything. Stick it behind the plate, hit. He's got a good approach. There's power there. I mean, he has a chance to be a very good big league regular catcher, but he's pretty far away. And because of the responsibilities of catching, sometimes it can take those guys a little bit longer to get there. So you don't want to just sort of say, oh, let's rush them up the ladder. Listen, you saw what the Padres did with Ethan Salas, who was super advanced because he was already bilingual and things like that. And I think they did him a disservice by moving him that quickly.
It was fast.
So now he's got a good head on his shoulders. I actually think Ethan Salas is going to be just fine, but it's taking him a little bit longer. And he was, so advanced in terms of his mindset. So, and I don't know Eduardo Tait, I don't know what makes him tick and things like that, but by and large, the younger catchers, it can take a little bit longer because there's so much to learn on both sides of the ball.
John, let's shift a little bit of gear here. So center field for the Phillies, I guess maybe with a brief exception here and there, has been kind of a revolving door for many years. Can Justin Crawford be the guy that nails it down for a long time?
I think so. I know people will talk about the ground ball rate and things like that. I think that he has shown improvement in his ability to impact the baseball in each of the last 2 seasons, particularly last year. Listen, I don't think he's ever going to be a power guy. And it's funny, if this were the 1980s, no one would say a thing, right? He'd be that sort of prototypical guy. Right. I think as long as he continues to refine his approach and see pitches and be that on base, top of the order catalyst, then yes. And he's gotten stronger. I actually got a chance to sit down with him this fall, right before he went to play for Team USA. And like he understands those criticisms, and to his credit, he didn't get all bulked up and try to lift and separate every time up and sell out for power, because that would get him to the big leagues. He's kind of been who he is. And that's his ticket. You can't teach speed, and he knows how to use it. And I think he will continue to add strength where you're not going to worry about him, just rolling weak ground balls all the time. And, lower levels of the minors, the issue is that you can hit a ground ball and outrun the infielders a lot of the time when you have that kind of speed. And that's not going to work long-term in the big leagues. So as long as he manages his swing and miss, he'll be like a better version of Billy Hamilton, with, I think, the ability to drive the ball more. He's physical, right? Have you guys talked to him up close? It's not like he's 5'8", or he's wispy thin. Like, there's some strength there for him to tap into, and not for him to tap into, like I said, to try to hit the ball over the fence, but so he doesn't get the bat knocked out of his hands by big league pitchers. And I think he's going to be able to do that. And I think it's not going to take that much longer. Like, I think 2025 could be a year where it really clicks for him, and you could see him in September if there's a need.
Wow. And the defense is stellar.
Yes. And and it's going to continue to get better. He has the ability to outrun mistakes he makes on reads and routes, and that's continued to improve. So like, I think that he's going to be just fine.
So this is going to be a strange question. Do you see, and I don't know, the whole picture of where the Phillies are. Do you see at the beginning of his career a possible platoon situation? Does this guy handle left-handers well? He's a left-handed hitter. Rojas is a right-handed hitter. Is there a possibility that there's a platoon type situation, especially early in his career? Or do you think this guy is an everyday guy handling, left-handers okay?
I mean, I think if you want to ease him in that way, I suppose you could do that. You don't bring a first rounder up to the big leagues to have him be granted on the long side of a platoon. He's hit lefties okay, at least this last year. I didn't know the splits off the top of my head, but right. He had an 815 ops against righties and a 734 ops against lefties. It's not great, but it's not awful. But he also had 61 plate appearances against left-handers. Some of that is hard.
He'll get significantly more at the big leagues nowadays.
Right. No, and that's that's always been the case. But we've seen over years and years and years guys who they have a reputation that they can't hit lefties until they're given a chance to hit lefties regularly, and then they're okay. There's probably always going to be a split. I guess you could do that. But
back in the day, that was something that you introduced the guy in. Did that a little bit with Utley, but then he obviously became Utley pretty quickly.
I think depending on, like, if let's say he comes up, things really click in the minors and they want to bring him at some point in the second half of this season. That's a pretty quick timetable, but let's say that might make a lot of sense, especially because everyone expects the Phillies to contend, and then sort of kind of take the handcuffs off and let him play, every day. I think he's going to hit lefties more than well enough to do it long term. But if you want to ease him in that way, that's fine. The problem is that sometimes it's a self-fulfilling prophecy where you don't let a guy hit lefties, and then suddenly he's a guy who can't hit lefties. And like, well, how do you know?
No, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
No doubt. Jonathan, one last one for me. We had Preston Mattingly on in late October and then Luke Merton on in November after he got promoted. We asked each of them, is there an unsung guy or a guy that we don't talk about a lot that really gets you excited? And Preston mentioned Gabe Rinconis Jr. And I think Luke Merton mentioned Otto Kemp. And we're not necessarily to talk about either of those guys, but do you have a guy that maybe an under the radar guy, I guess on the top 30 list that like, I'm kind of interested this season to see what this guy does, maybe, below, the heavy hitters that we talk about a lot. Is there anybody on that list that you're kind of curious about, maybe more so than others?
I mean, it's funny because I just saw Otto Kemp in the fall league.
Yes, you did. And I remember you shot me a text saying, this guy can hit.
Well, and he reminds me of, it shows you my institutional memory, the guy who was incredible in the fall league the year before they traded to Milwaukee. You guys got to help me out here.
Oh yeah.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking
Come
about.
on.
Oliver Dunn.
Yes.
Oliver Dunn. Right. Oliver Dunn.
There you go.
And when I talked to Otto Kemp, he even said, like, seeing what Dunn did in the fall league made him think, well, why can't I do it? It's kind of similar profiles, just in terms of he's probably going to move around a little bit. Otto is probably a little more physical. I don't think he's an everyday guy, but if you told me that he's the kind of guy that you have moving around and he gets 400 plate appearances on a championship caliber team, I believe that. He's a little bit older, so he's not like, ooh, he's really exciting. You know what? I would like to see Christian McGowan stay healthy.
Interesting.
Just because I'm trying to, again, obviously I'll use my own familiarity bias because I saw him pitch really well in the fall league, and he's a guy whose name has come up a lot. Like because of the injuries, I keep wanting to kind of shove him off the list or way down the list. And then it's like, well, people ask about him or, and other teams mention him. The stuff is good. So I'd like to see him put together like a full healthy year. Now he's going to turn 25. I need to pick a younger guy to be really excited about, right? But
that works.
Because he may impact if he's an older guy and he's pitching well. I mean, Dave Dombrowski's not afraid to bring that guy.
Right, I might put him in the bullpen. Right, I would put him in the bullpen at this point. They were keeping him stretched out because he needed reps. The other guy I'll bring up because he was, Jim Callis and I break up the draft, sort of split the country in half. And Griffin Burkholder was from my, as we call it, neck of the draft. And he's really interesting. And obviously the Phillies thought so too, to go over slot to sign him. But he's super athletic. He kind of fits the mold. He's strong and athletic. There's some raw power. He can really, really run. I think that if for whatever reason, Justin Crawford needs to move over to left field in a few years, Griffin Burkholder might be your center fielder. But give him time.
Wow.
I was going to ask you about him because they call him a late bloomer, very athletic. He was going to go to West Virginia. And so he was the second round pick. Nori was the first round pick. How do you compare and contrast those guys? And what do you see in terms of those two guys' ceiling?
I mean, they both have really high ceilings. Nori, if you guys talk to any scouts like in the area, if you ever like dig into him, they love Dante Nori. Like I've never seen, and he's from Jim's part of the country, but people will talk about Dante Nori without being asked, just because of the makeup, how hard he works, his feel for the game, all those things. The thing that sort of made him a surprising first round pick is his age, and he's
1 year though.
He's 20. I listen, that's a soapbox Jim and I get on all the time in terms of the age thing. Now with the teams having models, guys like that, there were a number of teams that wouldn't consider him at all, let alone in the first round. And I remember years ago when Brett Beatty was coming out and everyone was talking about, he's 19. And I get it, especially when the guy, Nori is playing in a part of the country where the high school competition isn't great. We played in the summer showcase circuit. You saw what it looked like there. You have to evaluate how he does things regardless of the competition, which is tough. But with a guy like Brett Beatty or even a guy like Dante Nori, they're like, oh, we can't take him. But in 2 years, when he's a draft eligible sophomore, boy, that's an incredible find. Now you have 2 years of college data. I understand the reasoning, but I'm like, sometimes you're missing out on really, really good players if you think he's good. So, I think the case is, with the Phillies, they really liked Nori, and at that part of the draft, it's always a crapshoot, but there wasn't people screaming to be taken right there. And I think maybe they had a sense that he wasn't going to be around for their second round pick. So they said, we're going to take the guy that we really like and we really believe in the makeup and the tools, and we'll see what happens. But you won't find a guy that scouts aren't, who scouts root for more than Dante Nori.
So, John, obviously you're a storyteller at heart. You get to know these kids. You write about these kids. You ever build a relationship with a kid and then, 6 months later he texts you and says, hey, why am I so low on the list?
It's been known to happen. I have some DMs I can show you at another time that I won't share right now. The thing that's crazy is every once in a while people will jokingly, and I'll tell like a couple of sort of fun stories that I know players won't mind me telling, because it's more about certain tools. So one is Brett Phillips, and everyone knows Brett Phillips's personality, and he did this all with the biggest heart that you can imagine. But I think we had posted a highlight of him making some just absolutely ridiculous throw from right field. He was still a prospect, and he kind of was like tweeted, "That's not an 80 arm. I don't know what is." So we kind of we talked it over, and we're like, you know what, Brett Phillips, you're right, and we changed it to an 80 arm, and we haven't had very 80 arms. And then the other sort of joking thing I had was when Julio Rodriguez was coming up, and he worked really hard. Now, this is funny. This is contradicting what I said, that you can't teach speed, but you can improve your speed. And that guy worked tirelessly on his athleticism and his speed. I think people thought he was going to be a sort of a power hitting right fielder, and he got faster and faster. And I remember telling him, it was in the Futures game, and I told him that if he stole a base in the Futures game, I'd change his speed grade to a 60. It was the Futures game, maybe it was the Fall Stars game, one of those kind of things. And the funny thing is they stole third, but overslid third and got tagged out, and I told them it didn't count. But he was very good-natured about it. The thing, that every once in a while you get a player, even a guy who's made it to the big leagues, who and a lot of these guys, they use the chip on their shoulder to motivate them. And so they feel that they got slighted with how they were ranked or how things were graded out. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while, I've gotten a big leaguer or two who've complained either publicly or on DMs, be like, what are you doing? Or I can't believe you ranked me there. And I'm like, dude, you've been in the big leagues for 6 years. Who cares? I'm wrong all the time. We are often wrong, and we admit it. It's part of what we do. But it's fascinating to me that people care. Maybe use a different chip on your shoulder. With that much big league success or a big league track record, someone else must have slighted you other than how Jonathan Mayo rated you on your team list.
That's great. Holding on to it forever.
Hey, whatever works for them, man. I don't lose sleep over it.
Exactly awesome right. Stuff, nor should you, man. Jonathan, hey, thanks so much for coming on the show. This is great. I mean, I know fans are excited for the spring, and they're excited to see how these prospects develop, and we'll see a lot of them at the spring breakout game coming back in March. For those fans that don't know, spring breakout, every organization takes their top prospects, puts them on a team together. For a lot of these guys, first time ever playing with one of the other guys in the system, and then they go play another team's top prospects. Last year it was the Phillies, went to Lakeland, played the Tigers' top prospects. I didn't know what to expect, Jonathan. I really thought it was a lot of fun, and it was fun to hear the players like Aidan Miller say, I got to play with Justin Crawford today, or Mick Abel saying it was cool to play with Aidan Miller. I heard about this dude, and I've seen him at the complex, but to actually be, look behind him and see Aidan Miller behind me playing shortstop was pretty sick. Justin Crawford, same thing, all those guys. So I'm looking forward to seeing that again. I think fans that went to the games got a big kick out of it. And I know you guys put a lot of work into, getting it together and putting together the rosters and helping put together the rosters or, whatever. And it's a lot of fun. So
no,
keep an eye for that as well.
Yeah, no, we enjoy it, and we're hoping to continue to, it'll be kind of similar to last year's feel, but we get a lot of feedback that even people within baseball would love to see it be some kind of, the timing of it is tough, but like an in-season tournament or a lead into the fall league, like ways so you could have, now it's the end of the year, so, you run into the same problem in terms of using pitchers, but like, I think that, there are ways to build it out even more, hopefully. So it's not just that like one-off. Because I was at last year, I was at the Paul Skeens versus Jackson Holiday game, which was kind of the whole reason. And the buzz in that place was incredible, and it was amazing, and it was over really fast because Skeens threw one inning and was ticked because he wanted to. He threw like 8 pitches. And he wanted to go a second. You've seen them compete in the National League now, so you see where it comes from. And we all wanted to see him throw a second, but they had a plan worked out, and it is what it is. But I wouldn't have minded seeing a little bit more of that kind of thing. And if you have a little bit of a tournament, then maybe you get a chance to expand the looks at these guys to a national audience.
Yeah, well, it was really cool. And again, I think of spring breakout. I think of warm weather in Florida. So we're all excited. So Jonathan, thanks again for coming on, man. We appreciate it. And we will be back next week.
Thank you, John.
The Philly Show is brought to you by the Foul Territory Network. Subscribe to The Philly Show on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you like us, give us a review. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, X, Facebook, and Threads. Find Ruben's analysis before, during, and after Phillies games on NBC Sports Philadelphia, on the Sports Radio 94 WIP Morning Show, and MLB Network. Find Jim at allphly.com. Find me at MLB.com, the Phillies Beat newsletter, and MLB Network.